Welcome back to our series, Modern Family, Ancient Design. And I want to welcome our Coweta campus, our Sapulpa campus, those of you that have taken the time to watch this online. Thank you so much for being with us. This is week number 2 of our Modern Family series. We started off last week with a little something for those that were thinking about getting married. But for those that have been married for a while, maybe just this little cartoon, do I look fat? The response, do I look stupid? So yeah, you know what we're talking about there, don't you? If you've been married for a long time. Also, in preparation for Father's Day, I thought I might just share this bit of advice for all the guys. If a woman says, do what you want, do not do what you want. Stand still, do not blink, don't even breathe, just play dead. Good advice for you right there, guys. And what about this guy? My wife yelled at me saying, you weren't even listening just now, were you? The man, I thought, man, what a weird way to start a conversation. Yeah. All right. Well, last week we began this and we talked about some of the foundations of marriage. We went to Matthew chapter 19 where Jesus is there addressing a question that is asked of him, not a genuine question, but a question meant to trap him about divorce. But what we find there is this incredible teaching about marriage. And Jesus gives to us, by taking us all the way back to the beginning, some incredible information about the design and the function of marriage. One of the things that we find out is that marriage is designed to take place between a male and a female, that it was designed for a man and a woman to come to marriage, and this exclusive relationship. We talked last week about how marriage was designed to be a primary relationship, that a man was to leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, right out of Genesis chapter 2. And it reminds us of this importance, this principal relationship that we're to have with our spouse, that it is to be the most important earthly relationship that we have. So it's to supersede the relationship with our family of origin. It's to supersede the relationship that we have with our children. It's to supersede the relationship that we have with people at work or best friends or whatever. It's to be a primary relationship. It's also to be an intimate relationship. This idea of oneness, of being one flesh. Jesus, again, quoting from Genesis chapter 2. It's the idea of intimacy and sexual oneness. And we also talked about how marriage is to be a permanent relationship. Jesus finished his teaching there by saying this: what God has joined together, let no one separate. What God has done, God has already done the work of joining people together. Don't try to unjoin what God has already joined together. And so what we want to do today is talk about some practical ways in which we can live in that kind of marriage relationship, one that is permanent, one where two people commit together, one that is an intimate relationship, one where our relationship is primary. And we're going to talk today about two really just basic things that if we could master these, this would put us a long way into having a great marriage relationship. There's simply going to be this. We're going to talk today about learning how to have fun together and learning how to fight fair. If we could figure out just having fun together, making sure that was important in our marriage relationship, and then in our disagreements and conflicts, if we learned how to fight fair, it would put us a long way down the road. Let's start with some of the words from Solomon from Ecclesiastes 9:9, where he says, enjoy life with your wife, whom you love, all the days of this meaningless life that God has given you under the sun. I just want to remind you that this particular literary writing, Ecclesiastes, is one with a little sarcastic tone to it. And so when you read things like meaningless life, we're taken into account that that's what Solomon's doing. He's talking a little bit tongue-in-cheek right here. The important thing is, he says, enjoy life with your wife. Enjoy life with your spouse. Solomon is saying, listen, life is short. Don't waste it not enjoying it with the person that you're married. Learn how to have fun together. Make sure that you make that a priority, the enjoyment of life with your spouse. Schedule it if you have to. Make sure that it happens. Enjoy it. That's what successful couples do. That's what couples who stay married learn to do. They learn to enjoy one another. They learn to have fun together. And so we're going to kind of say it simply like this. Give your relationship the same priority and attention you gave it when you were dating. Give your relationship the same priority and attention you gave your relationship when you were dating your spouse. I mean, that's what we all did. There was lots of fun that was involved. We enjoyed being together. We made sure it was important. We did everything that we could. Some of you drove long hours. Some of you called each other in the middle of the night and stayed on the phone for hours. You did whatever you could to talk and to have a relationship with your spouse to be. It's interesting. God kind of understands how important that is, obviously. I mean, He designed the relationship. We talked last week about marriage being a means of meeting a human need for companionship. And so in His wisdom, God says this: if a man has recently married, he must not be sent to war or have any other duty laid on him. For 1 year, he's to be free to stay at home and bring happiness to the wife that he's married. Now, before we get into the meat of that, I just want to know if I can get an amen from the ladies right here about your husband making you happy. I mean, that's what God's saying right there, that your husband is to make you happy. But God, in His wisdom, understands that a husband and wife have to have time together. For there to be happiness, there has to be some time. It takes marriage. It takes some work. And your marriage has to be protected. That's what God is ensuring happens here for this newlywed. There will always be things to do. There will always be war. In this case, there will always be work. There will always be important things that have to be done. But unless you prioritize things like your relationship, it gets crowded out in all of those urgent kind of things. It takes time to have a marriage, and that time has to be balanced. We all have to do things in our marriage. We all have to spend time taking care of matters. You only have so much time, and so as husband and wife, your time has to be spread across different things. One of the times that we spend time as a husband and wife, Andrea and I, this is the case with us, we have to manage things. We're managing in our time. So part of what we do is we're managing the household. When our kids were little, we were managing their affairs. We were dealing with their thing. And so we had to figure out who was going to take Kyler to football practice, and who was going to take Kimber to soccer practice, and who was going to take the dog to the vet, and who was going to be there when the plumber arrived, and who was going to take care of the finances. Those are just management things that we have to do. So some of our time spent managing. Some of our time, though, is spent resolving, isn't it? We got to resolve issues. There's problems that come up. There's things that we have to deal with. There's struggles. And so we've got to come in and intervene with the conflict with our kids where siblings are fighting, or sometimes it's a marriage issue and we're in the middle of a disagreement about something that's lasted for a couple of days or a week or a month, and it just weighs on us, and we talk about it. It seems like we talk about it a long time. And so we've got resolving and we've got managing, but some of our time has to be spent enjoying. We have to find some time where we just enjoy one another. That means just small talk, not business talk, not household management talk, not resolving talk, but just small talk, doing activities together, having fun together. This is the romancing part. It's the date part. The problem is that most couples spend most of their time on 1 and 2. In fact, you can master 1 and 2. You can do really, really good at 1 and 2 and make sure that the house is taken care of and your kids are catered to. And you can do that to exhaustion, but it's not what your marriage needs most. I mean, it's possible that you can spend so much time managing and resolving that you don't have the time or you don't have the energy to ever get around to the enjoying part. But I just want to remind you, you got married because you enjoyed one another. You liked one another. You enjoyed spending time with one another. You had fun together. In fact, you got married because you couldn't imagine spending the rest of your life apart. You didn't get married because you thought, man, it's going to be great when we discuss problems and when we resolve conflicts down the road. You understood that that would be a necessary part of the relationship, but it's not why you got married in the first place. You got married because you liked being together. You enjoyed being together. This happens all the time when I'm talking with couples. Maybe they're in my office because they're dealing with some conflict, or maybe we're having, coffee together and just sharing, life. And I'll hear their story, their struggle with their marriage relationship. And one of the things that I'll ask them, and it's something that's commonly asked with my marriage therapist friends. I know they ask a very similar question, but I'll ask them, when's the last time you went on a date together? When's the last time you went out together? When's the last time you had some fun together, just the two of you? And again, this is a common response, and it's one that's given to me, it's one to give to my counselor friends, is something like this: I don't remember. Or I've had this. When I've asked them, when's the last time you had fun together? And one of them, they'll look at each other, and one of them will finally come around saying, well, let's see, Junior is turning 5 next month, so it's probably about 5.5 years, something like that. That's not right. To not remember, for it to be that long, for us not to be able to put a time to it, to not be able to say, this is a time where we spent just enjoying each other. And so one of the things that often gets recommended is, especially for couples that are in the middle of the child rearing years, that you spend a regular time for yourselves, just yourselves, going out on a regular date. Now, before we talk about what a date is, let's talk about what a date is not. Attending your child's ball game, not a date. Grocery shopping together, I don't care what you say, not a date. Going to your or your spouse's work picnic, yeah, that one's not a date either. Those don't count as dates. Those are not going. Listen, just going out to eat, that's not a date. So, some of you, that's a pretty routine thing, and that's not a date. It could be, but it's not in and of itself a date. In fact, I like the way that a friend of mine, a counselor friend of mine here in town, Bowden McElroy, some of you know him at Christian Family Institute, I like the way that he defined what a date is. He defines it in a few phrases here. Number one, it's just the two of you. It doesn't count if you're including kids, if other people are involved, even if there's other couples. Now, I'm not saying there's not a time for you to go on a date or a double date or something like that, but there needs to be just some date time where it's just the two of you. Nobody else is involved, nobody else is included. Just the two of you and no other agenda. We're not going to try to figure out something. We're not going to stop by and do this. We're not going to run an errand on our way. We're not going to, have some other thing that we're doing as a part of this. There is no agenda with this. The agenda is us. The agenda is just us. Just the two of us, no other agenda, and no discussion of problems. Because here's what typically happens is you finally get some time together and you think you've got to deal with issues. You think you've got to schedule things on the calendar. You think you've got to figure out management issues with the kids. And sometimes you just need to agree that your spouse is going to be, this is just going to be some friend time. This is just going to be some time where we enjoy one another. We're not going to talk about issues. We're not going to talk about conflicts. We may need to, and we're going to schedule that, and we're going to do it some other time. But this is not the time for that. This is not the time for that, because the sole purpose of this time is to have fun. We're going to have a date where we just have fun. This is to be an enjoyable time. Dates are shared experiences that are designed to keep us from drifting away from one another, from just getting into the ho-hum of marriage life. It is to help us remember why we got married in the first place. We come up with lots of excuses as married people why we don't ever get around to doing that or why we don't do this very often. I remember one of our excuses when our kids were little. We had 4 kids, and one of our excuses was we can't afford it. We just didn't have money to what we thought to go out on a date. And if that's your excuse, maybe that's the reason why you haven't gone out on a date in a while with your spouse. Let me just encourage you. Maybe you need to allot some of your finances to this. Maybe some money well spent would be taken from another area that is not as important as your marriage is, your primary relationship. Or maybe things are just so tight there's absolutely no changing that. Maybe you need to redefine what a date looks like. It doesn't have to be spent at the Warren Theater and a lot of money on a movie and a lot of money on food. A date can be as simple as going to the park. A date can be as simple as getting an ice cream cone. You don't have to spend a lot of money to have fun with your spouse. Another excuse that I hear and I've made before is we don't have anything to do for our kids. We don't have anyone to watch our kids. And again, that can be a difficult thing, especially if you've got lots of kids. If you've got a big family and you've got a tight budget and you're thinking, we can't afford a babysitter. Maybe you don't have family in town like other people have opportunity to kind of let family babysit. That was the case when our kids were little. We just didn't have that. And so maybe you're going to have to find some other ways of doing that. There was a time where we did babysitting swapping. We babysat for another couple so they could go out and then they would turn around and babysit for us. There was even a time as our kids started to get a little older, but we weren't really comfortable leaving them for long periods of time while they were awake. We would go hit a midnight movie on a Tuesday night, and we had old enough kids that they knew they could call us in an emergency, but we were able to sneak away for brief periods of time where we knew no one was running around and we knew no one was going to get into trouble. So that's another way to get over the excuse. One of the excuses that I hear is, well, we just don't have fun together. It's a disaster every time we go do something like that. I can recall that happening for us one time. It had been a while since we'd gone on a date, and everything that could go wrong went wrong that night. And we came back and we went, we didn't even like this. We're not even having fun. We're not doing this anymore. But that's part of what happens is when you get out of the habit of doing this, it does create opportunity for it to be awkward and for there to be strange things that happen, but you got to just keep doing it. Of course, one of the reasons or excuses that I'm given is we don't have time. We're too busy to make this an important part of our relationship. Max Lucado several years ago wrote something about busyness. I've edited it down just a little bit. He said, busyness is an expert in robbing the sparkle and replacing it with the drab. Busyness invented the yawn and put the hum in the humdrum. The strategy of business is deceptive. With the passing of time, he'll infiltrate your heart with fatigue and cover the cross with dust so you'll be safely out of reach of change. Busyness won't steal your marriage from you. He'll do something far worse. He'll paint it with the familiar coat of drabness. He'll replace evening gowns with bathrobes, nights on the town with evenings in the recliner, and romance with routine. He'll scatter the dust of yesterday over the wedding pictures in the hallway until they become a memory of another couple in another time. Hence, walks won't be taken, games will go unplayed, hearts will go unnurtured, opportunities for intimacy will go ignored, all because the poison of busyness has blinded your eyesight to the wonder of your spouse. How long has it been since you have dated your spouse? If it's been a while, why don't you just turn to him right now and say something like, hey, baby, let's go out this week. Make sure that you have some fun together. If you want to have a marriage of permanence, then you got to have fun together. The other thing that we want to talk about, and the other thing that successful marriages seem to have mastered, is this. They learn to fight fair. Husband and wife, they learn to fight fair. Now, I've had enough conversations with people talking about marriage and talking about things that I always will have somebody say to me something like this: well, preacher, my wife and I, we never fight. My husband and I, we never disagree. I suppose that could be a situation. But if I can just be brutally honest with you, that's not the case with my wife and I. And so for those of you that are in a marriage where you never fight, you never disagree, if you're being genuine and you're being honest, God bless you. That's a great place to be. I don't think that's probably the majority of us. My wife and I, we've done plenty of fighting. We still do plenty of fighting, and that's just, I just want you to know that's the case with lots of us. In fact, I heard about another preacher 3 weeks after he had married this couple. This woman, the bride, calls him. Joanna called and she said, Pastor, John and I had our first fight together. What am I going to do? And the preacher was saying to her, calm down. It's going to be all right. It's not half as bad as you think. Every marriage has to have their first fight. In fact, you'll have many more fights, I know, throughout your marriage. I know, said Joanna, but what am I going to do with the body? Yeah, maybe not appropriate, I don't know, but the truth is we all have disagreements. Husbands and wives, they have disagreements, they have fights, and I believe in a marriage you can genuinely have disagreements and you can fight over issues to a degree, but you don't have to fight dirty. You don't have to fight dirty. I love what Ephesians 4:29 tells us. This is the Apostle Paul writing, and he says, do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouth. We're going to relate this specifically to marriage, but obviously Paul is saying this is just the case in general. If you're a follower of Jesus, don't let unwholesome talk come out of your mouth. But notice, this isn't just about, saying a cuss word when you hit your finger with the hammer. This is in the context of relationships. Don't let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouth, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. So again, this is talking about talk in relationships. And notice, don't let unwholesome talk come out, but this is the kind of thing that should take place in your relationship, in your marriage relationship. Stuff that's helpful, stuff that builds the other person up, stuff that meets their needs, stuff that benefits those. Those are the kinds of things. We are to communicate in that kind of way, to communicate in love. And so some of you are going to need to go home today and you're going to need to ask for forgiveness because you have not talked to your spouse in a loving way. You have said things that are not appropriate. You have said things that are out of bounds. And what I believe is that no matter how angry we are, no matter how much we disagree, how opposite of the end of spectrum we are, you've got to, in your conversation, still be able to say, we're going to fight fair. So let me just share with you some things that we have kind of instituted over the years in our relationships. Again, we decided that we're probably going to fight and have disagreements, and there's going to be conflicts on occasion. And some of the rules that we're going to have, some of the ground rules that we're going to have is, number one, belittling the other person, just off limits. Demeaning the other person, devaluing the other person, those were just off limits for us. Calling names of other people. In fact, I'm embarrassed sometimes when I'm around other couples who will use words and will use terms and will call each other's names that I don't think should come out of a Christian's mouth anyway, but to call your spouse that, it just is way off. Pushing those hot buttons, saying those things that intentionally hurt. We know they're going to hurt, and we say them so that the other person will be hurt. Those are the kinds of things that we shouldn't say. That ought to be off limit. Belittling the other person. That should just be something that we decide I am not going to do. Rule number 2, never threaten divorce. I don't think that is wholesome talk. For in the middle of a conflict or a disagreement, for one spouse to say to another, I'm just going to leave. Well, we'll just get a divorce. I think that should never, ever come out of the mouth of somebody, especially a Christian, that's married. No matter how mad you are, no matter how serious you are about whatever the issue it is, giving ultimatums like that will never do any good. It will not open up communication. It's just going to shut it down. It's just going to make the other person mad. There is no place that is acceptable to say, I'm going to threaten divorce. If that's something that occasionally you say in a disagreement, just decide today, I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm not going to threaten that with my spouse. I'm not going to say that. I'm not going to bring it up. It's not even on the table. Number 3, stop bringing up the past. Listen, there's nothing you can do. There's nothing your spouse can do about the past. It's in the past. It's already happened. You can't go back and change it. So stop bringing it up. Stop adding up all those things. Listen, if you're always bringing up the past with your spouse, it is you that has chosen to not forgive. You have chosen not to forgive them. Now, there's times I know that we may have to address some things that have happened in the past, but if you're chronically bringing up the past, if every time you're arguing, well, you did this, or she did this, or this happened, you always say, she said this. Listen, you could spend all day bringing up each other's past. It doesn't do any good. It doesn't promote any kind of progress. It just makes the other person mad. Quit bringing up the past. Rule number 4, listen to understand instead of to reply. When you're having a conversation, a disagreement, a fight, make sure that you're listening so that you can understand, not just listening so that you can come up with your reply whenever they take a breath. That's typically what we do, isn't it? We're in the middle of a conflict, it gets a little heated, and we're ready just to give our comebacks. We're ready just to reply, and that begins what we're thinking. And often we miss the communication because we're not trying to understand. We're not giving that other person enough time to be able to share what they're saying. We're not asking the appropriate questions. Oftentimes we really don't even care, if we're honest. We're just trying to put our words in. We're trying to make sure what we want said gets said. Next time you're in a conflict, next time you're in a disagreement with your spouse or with anyone, listen to understand. Take the time to understand what they're saying. And then this last one, before things escalate, take a time out. You know, what happens is often we get into a disagreement and we're able to handle ourselves for a while, but then we tend to get emotional. Somebody says something, it makes us angry. You feel your blood pressure going up, and you begin to say things that you really don't mean, say things that you really don't even believe. And before long, it can escalate to the point where it gets out of control and things get said that you cannot take back. Before that happens, maybe it's appropriate for you just to say, hey, listen, I need to just stop for a minute. Can we just take a time out? You can't say this in anger. You have to ask it genuinely. Can we take a time out? I don't want to say something that I would regret. I don't want to say something that's inappropriate. I'm also not trying to get out of us talking about this. I'll be glad to come back and talk about it later tonight or tomorrow or set a time to do it. But I don't want things to happen that could potentially hurt our relationship. I love you more than what we're talking about right now. Can we hold off and talk about this later? We'll come back and address it, but I want to wait till I cool down. Basically, what we're saying when we're talking about fighting fair is learn to attack the issues without attacking each other. See, I think it's possible. I think it's possible for conflicts to happen within a marriage relationship and for healthy disagreements to take place. I think it's healthy for disagreements to happen, for us to disagree on issues, but it's also possible that we can deal with the issue, we can attack the issue without attacking our spouse, without demeaning them, without devaluing them, without calling them a name, without attacking our relationship. We can attack the issue without attacking each other. It's okay to fight over issues, but don't make it personal. Don't get in the middle of it where your emotions take over. Don't let a difference in opinion lead to a difference in address. Because unfortunately that happens time and time again, and it doesn't just happen in people who are not going to church. It happens to people who go to church and who are Christians, and they allow this to get out of control. Sometimes things that we talked about just need to have some ground rules. We just need to be able to say, we're not going to do this. But I think we all understand that sometimes things are of a heavy nature. Sometimes our disagreements have become a constant thing, or there's one thing, a conflict that we can't seem to resolve. Those are times when I think it's appropriate for us to seek out some help. It tends to get overblown, and people get nervous about going to see a counselor or a marital therapist. But listen, there are people that help me with all kinds of things in life that I don't feel bad about. I don't feel bad when I take my car to the mechanic. I don't feel bad when I go see my doctor. I don't maybe really want to do that, but when I'm sick enough, I want to get better. When my car's broken, I want it to get fixed. And when my relationship isn't functioning like it should be, there's a time where I want to call in somebody to help me. And if you're there, make sure you do something about that. If you don't know who to talk to, come ask me. Talk to somebody with our Hope Center that meets here at our Broken Arrow campus. You find somebody that can help you. I'd be glad to get some help, because your marriage is to be your primary relationship. And God wants it to be an intimate relationship. And we all know that intimate relationships don't just happen. They're fostered over a friendship. And ultimately what happens, I think, when we learn some of the practical things we talked about today, having fun together and learning to fight fair together, it ends up being a permanent relationship. Pray with me. God, that's what we're praying for right now. For all the marriages that are represented here, that God, you would help us to live in relationships with our spouse that would honor you. God, I'm praying that you would help us as we represent you, not just in the way that we live our personal life, but the way that we relate to our spouse. Because God, you say that there is something about that honors you. And so, Father, I'm praying that you would protect marriage relationships. I'm praying, Father, that marriages here, that God, you would help them to enjoy one another, to have fun together. Father, I'm praying in the midst of disagreement and conflict that God, even in those times, that husbands and wives would honor you and honor one another, put each other in front of themselves. Father, help us not to have unwholesome talk that comes out of our mouth, but the kind of talk where there is benefit that allows progress to happen. Thank you, God, for giving us some guidelines and giving us some design for our relationships. We pray it in Jesus' name. Amen.